to look at for the semester. Usually I try to get as many genres as I can. And so usually we do poetry, novel, essay, and play. Oh, look at that kitty cat. I almost said puppy because we have a new puppy next door. The person who lives in the flat next to me, I'm hearing his puppy. Everybody is very much enamored of the cat. This is part of the COVID thing. I see very needy this morning. Yes, I understand. I feel very needy many mornings myself, as does my dog. We can learn a lot from animals about just getting what we need. Just jump up on somebody's computer keyboard next time you need something. All right, so let's move ahead and we'll look at Samuel Beckett's play, Krapps' Last Tape. So I'm going to share my screen with you. And I have a few things to say in general about where we are in the semester in terms of thinking about some of the main themes that we've touched on in class. And then we'll get to talking about Samuel Beckett in particular and Krapps' Last Tape, a play from the either late 50s or early 60s, I can't quite recall, a relatively late play for him after that. This is my favorite of Beckett's plays, although I like and many of the others, most of them are sort of absurdist, meaning that they try to reflect in their kind of characterization of life, the absurdity and the complexity of living in sort of what we might call late modernity. Some people call it the postmodern period, but usually it's figured somewhere after after World War II. Okay, so let me say a few words first about just in general about the kind of arc of the class and how we got to where we are now. So when we began the class, we began by talking about sort of what you might call the sort of hyper, what do they call that in Star Trek, where when you go into hyper speed or something, whatever that is, when you sort of like break through into a new dimension. And that's what it feels like happens with the French Revolution, is that Romanticism sort of breaks into kind of a new form of modernity that will not be oriented around monarchy necessarily so much, or at least there will always be there's now a struggle between monarchy and democracy and other forms of liberation and organizing society in different ways. And then consumerism, capitalism, revolution, the individual, the family, all these different sorts of new ideas really break through in Romanticism. And then we sort of head into Victorianism in Britain, which is a very kind of consolidating gains that come from empire and come from colonialism and other things like this. And then into modernism, where all that kind of blows apart and we're faced with another sort of explosion. And then maybe you can think of this new place that we're in, sort of postmodernism, or I like this term hypermodernity, which is used by an art historian named T.J. Clark, because I think it describes very much the kind of late modern place that we're in, which is we're not really done with modernism. It's just sort of even more intense. In any case, how does this movement that we've tracked correlate with the idea of humanism, secular humanism? And when I say secular, I mean not religious humanism, like something sort of different and new. So one way of understanding how these two things come together, how changes in literary production and sort of societal organization and the idea of the human come together, is to consider this term, modes of production, right? So it seems to me that this term, modes of production, really helps us to understand how things change. And when I talk about modes of production, I'm not only talking about the way that uh, goods and commodities are produced, like things are produced for the market. I'm also talking about how artworks are produced. I'm also talking about how human life is produced. I'm also talking, right? I mean, because like, if you think about that, there's been massive changes in the production of human life. Uh, for example, the increases in understanding human biology and human anatomy and medicine has led to longer lives. It's led to fewer deaths in infancy. It's led to all kinds of miraculous things that we couldn't imagine before. And soon we already are looking at genetic changes. And, I just got a shot, 2 shots that changed my RNA, right? I mean, these would have been unthinkable back in the day. So these are changes in modes of production in the human body, in the biological human, right? So this kind of this claim here that every change in the mode of production, technology, uh, um, political change, all of these changes in modes of production correspond in a change in the relations of production. So they correspond to a change in human relations. So I don't know if that's really clear. What I'm saying is that you change something over here and it changes something over here. All right. So it changes the way we understand human experience and even what it means to be a human. Right. One example of this, and I'll just give it and then we'll move on because I don't want to take too much time on this. I just want to sort of, for myself and maybe for you, sort of track where we've began with looking at romantic poetry, which is about the relationship of the human to nature and the relationship of the human to nature as a way of understanding human relations, human to human relations. But so I'll just give you, I'm trying to track that arc to where we are now with Beckett, and then with these, Beckett really is our end point. We look at a few poems next Tuesday, but it's pretty much Beckett is our end point. I want to sort of think about the correlation of that to the human. And one example I'll give to you that sort of, I think, suggests or proposes a real dilemma of what it means to be human is artificial life support. So is someone who has experienced some kind of trauma or for whatever reason is in a coma and is being kept alive artificially, are they still human? Right? And I'm not asking you to answer that question because that would take a lot of time away from the course. It's a very deep ethical question, but is that still human? If we clone a human being, is that still a human being? You see, so it changes what we consider human. Back in the 19th century, they had these horrible arguments about racial identity and racial difference, and these horrible arguments that said that if someone is Black, for example, they are radically different, in terms of their biology, and it turns out that that's completely wrong, that there is probably more genetic difference between me and my sister than there might be between me and another person of color. So it really, not another person, but a person of color, that it's really just bad science, but it changes what it means to be human each time you change the modes of production. So each time the science changes, each time technology changes, the fact that I'm talking to you now instead of being in a classroom. I had my first classroom experience in a long time yesterday for a class I teach in the community. We actually met socially distanced and I was wearing a mask, and I was so happy to be in a room with people. It was crazy. I was like jumping out of my shoes to teach the class. So in our class, these are some of the ways we've looked at changes in human relations based on the changes of modes of production. So Frankenstein, for example, we can see the argument there, the Promethean argument about overreach, like scientific overreach, as being also a warning about changes in the modes of production, not just in science, but also perhaps in industrial capitalism. So in other words, can we understand the creature as being like an embodiment of the working class, in which case the way that the creature is created from several different limbs is very much the way you produce a commodity. So if you're working in a factory making something, you're probably only doing one small part of things. So if you're assembling a car, for example, you may only be you may only be sort of calibrating certain machines to put on doors. It used to be you'd actually be putting on the doors, but now you're calibrating machines to put on doors, or whatever it is that you're doing. If you're working an assembly line at Amazon, you're pulling products off the shelf, and somebody else is then taking those products and delivering them. Before the division of labor, you would have been taking the thing, putting it in a truck, driving the truck there yourself, taking it off, right? So is that a sort of metaphor? Is the creature a metaphor for that division of labor? Marx has this interesting claim that he says that in industrial capitalism, when your division of labor is like this, what ends up happening is that the product itself, the commodity, has a spiritual life, and the worker becomes more and more material. So it's a sort of reversal. I don't know if that, to the degree to which that's true, but I think there's some truth to it. That's an interesting idea that we saw in Frankenstein. So in a strange way, the creature becomes more human as Victor becomes less. Then we come to Dorian Gray, and we can say maybe that the inhumanity of Dorian, right? And what that would correspond to is that Dorian becomes less and less human, the less vulnerable he is to his mortality, and the less open he is to the effects of time. So strangely, what makes him most human is the fact that he can die. And the more he becomes, the more he acts outside of what we would consider an ethical human realm, and that corresponds to this change in him where he realizes that he can get away with all of this behavior that he has, right? In Jude the Obscure, Jude and Sue attempt to be free of a society that denies them their full humanity. That's when I think the most interesting aspect is when Jude finally finds his voice at the end and speaks back to the people in Christminster and tells them, look, are you saying that I'm somehow a failure because I didn't accomplish these things? I still read all these books. I still did all these things. Aren't I, in a certain sense, a success? Aren't people who push the boundaries and fail, aren't they more human in a way? So he challenges the view of the human that exists in the political structure as a mode of production, as a mode of producing a society. He challenges that at the end. Similarly, finally, in The Lighthouse, can humanity itself survive the changes in the modes of production? This is Virginia Woolf's big question over and over again in her novels. There's a novel called Between the Wars, which really sort of, between World War I and World War II. It's called Between the Acts, I think. But that's clearly what the metaphor is. And it's supposed to ask the question if humanity itself can survive. Okay, so I just wanted to track that now because it's my last opportunity to do sort of big meta commentary on the class and where we've been. And I think these questions are still very much open to us today. Another example of these kinds of questions about like who constitutes full humanity would be whether or not people that are incarcerated are completely full human beings. And I think about this in terms of the way in which not only people are sort of arguably incarcerated in conditions that are perhaps less than human, but the way in which if you've committed a crime, or if you've been convicted of a crime, which is not the same things, but let's say you're convicted of a crime, do you then forfeit your rights to your basic humanity? Does it make you somehow less human? And I think that's been one of the things we thought about when COVID was sort of rampaging through the prison industrial complex. And some people are like, well, who cares? That these are people who owe a debt to society, so they don't need the same protections, right? And other people, no, they do. So that's another example of the questions that we live with today. All right. So the new technology in Krapps' last tape, obviously, is the tape recorder, right? So we will get to this soon, but to me, this is the sort of key new technology, and the way it makes possible a reproduction of and a kind of strange temporality where several times can exist at once. Like there's Krapp, the main character in this play, listening to an earlier version of himself who had just listened to an earlier version of himself. And are all these earlier versions different? So are they the same person? Are we the same person as we go through time, especially when that person, that earlier version of itself can speak for itself? And that's, I think, the question in Krapp is in Krapp's last tape. Obviously, you've probably caught the pun, right, that he calls the main character Krapp, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later, why he might choose that. But there's something sort of constipated about this guy and his situation. But the change in modes of production then mean a change in what it constitutes human relations. And it's a very dark view because the main character, Krapp, becomes more and more alienated and isolated in the play. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at it. I hope you had a chance to look at the YouTube performance by John Hurt, which I think is really excellent. It was longer than I remembered it, and I think that's because the shortened version of it, where a lot of the emptiness and silence was reduced, has been taken offline. That was a movie version of the play by Adam Egoyan, and they seem, who is a director, Canadian director, and they seem to have, I can't find it anywhere. So I hope that you were able to look at it. But in any case, I'm not going to play it today. Instead, I'll just sort of, we'll work our way through the text, okay? So Beckett is a very important 20th century writer, very influential to poets and novelists. Like Yeats and Joyce, he is Irish. We didn't look at James Joyce really, but usually I often teach James Joyce's Dubliners in this course. He had been Joyce's secretary, so just as, it's a pretty interesting story, I think, just as Pound had been Yeats's secretary and was able to carry poetry forward, Beckett is Joyce's secretary and is able to carry fiction forward in a new way. He had been in psychoanalysis with a British psychoanalyst named Bion, somebody who is connected to the same person I mentioned earlier named Winnicott. They were both what's called object relations school of psychoanalysis. So he was in psychoanalysis. Like Joyce, he leaves England and doesn't come back, at least not very much. This is also true, of course, we know of well, he leaves Ireland and doesn't come back, I should say, not England. He does come back for periods of time, unlike Shelley and Byron, who leave England and really don't come back. He lived in Paris for much of his life, wrote his novels in French and his plays in English. That's because he seemed to think that thinking in those different ways with those different languages was helpful for him. And he's often related to the absurdist movement or the theater of cruelty, which is something Antonin Artaud was the main thinker of this theater of cruelty. All right, so let's first talk about, before we begin talking about what the tapes represent, let's first take a look at the staging of the play, because I think this is important. So here are the stage directions that begin the play, okay? And I made a little note here for us to understand how old Krapp is, that he's 70. It's his 70th birthday when this play takes place. All right, so here are the stage directions. For those of you who have read plays, you will notice that the stage directions here are sort of strangely poetic. I think he's one of the first playwrights to do this. Usually playwrights will say something like a blank stage, a door in the background, a blue sky to one side, a tree, and then, for that scene. Beckett gives more interesting stage directions, which I think are meant to influence the director and the actors to enter into this poetic world with Beckett that he's creating. So you have to sort of think about how you might reproduce this. So here are the basic stage setup. It's a late evening in the future. Why it's set in the future, I believe, is because home recording technology was new in the 1950s and 60s. So we had to imagine a time in the future where that technology was available to somebody to have done it in the past. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but basically I think that's why it sort of has this sci-fi kind of feeling to it. The stage is in Krapp's den. Front center is a small table, 2 drawers of which face out toward the audience. Sitting at the table, facing front, that is across from the drawers, a wearyish old man, Krapp. And then they describe his costume, right? Or his persona, what he's wearing. Rusty black narrow trousers, too short for him. Rusty black sleeveless waistcoat, 4 capacious pockets. Capacious means big, right? Heavy silver watch and chain, grimy boot shirt, open at neck, no collar, surprising pair of dirty white boots, size 10 at least, very narrow and pointed. White face, purple nose, disordered gray hair, unshaven, very nearsighted but unspectacled, hard of hearing, cracked voice, distinctive intonation, laborious walk. On the table, a tape recorder with a microphone and a number of cardboard boxes containing reels of recorded tapes. Table and immediate adjacent area in strong light. Rest of stage remains in darkness. Okay, or the rest of stage in darkness. So again, let me just show you my little diagram of what I think this looks like. It looks like this. Here's the desk. Here's the circle of light. Everything outside that light is darkness. What's weird about it is that this is where the person would usually sit, but instead, Krapp is back here. Sorry. Krapp is back here, behind the desk, sitting in the place where the person who is usually not an authority would be sitting. So his desk is facing backwards. He's sitting at the back of his desk, which is, I think, telling in a way. He is facing us. The audience then is placed in the position of authority. The drawer is faced to us, and he's on the other side like we're interviewing. I don't quite know what to make of this, except that it opens things out. In terms of the lightness and the darkness, it seems to me that the light represents an area of safety, and everything outside of the light is not safe. It's an area that's not available to Krapp. All right. So any questions about the stage setup? It's usually performed very much this way. An overhead light. I've seen stage productions of it where the actor's face is somewhat obscured. Like you don't really see it, it's kind of in darkness. I don't know whether that was Beckett's idea. He staged the play himself, and I've never seen his direction of it and whether or not there was light on the actor's face. But as you know, if you only put the light above someone, it would obscure their face somewhat. So it's a strange setup. So probably there was some light coming up on his face, maybe a desk lamp illuminated the actor's face. But in the version I'm used to watching on YouTube, his face is very obvious, but it is dark all around him. All right. I'll also say a few things about this. The direction that says that he has a purple nose, this is probably supposed to be like clown-like, but also, does anybody know who gets a purple nose? What kind of people get purple noses? It's usually due to broken capillaries on the nose. Nobody? This is surprising to me. A purple nose is usually a sign of a heavy drinker, and Krapp is a heavy drinker. All right, so that is that's basically what I think is being represented. So he, on the one hand, he's a clown. He is a person living in modernity. I sort of say that I think maybe Beckett is thinking these things are related. I say clown because he has, like white boots that are too big, and he has this purple nose and this shock of hair. Actually, Beckett had a shock of white hair, sort of prematurely gray, and it just sort of, he had a lot of hair and it just sort of stuck right up. So I don't know whether he's playing with that, but I think to me, it strikes that it reminds me of a clown or something like that. Back to the beginning. Krapp remains a minute motionless, and if you saw the recorded play by Adam McGoyan, you'll see that, you'll remember that he sits for a long time. And when you look at the play directions, when he's talking, this word pause, P-A-U-S-E, recurs over and over again. So if an actor, to be true to the text, would take long pauses, as John Hurt does, and it makes for what could be a 30-minute play into like a 2-hour play. And it means that the audience is made very uncomfortable. And I think this is part of Beckett's idea, is that the audience is like, come on already, and it's to be placed into this different kind of time frame or time signature that we find Krapp in. All right. So here's the stage directions for Krapp at the beginning of the play. It's very, very kind of semi-comical. All right. Krapp remains a moment motionless. heaves a great sigh, looks at his watch, fumbles in his pocket, takes out an envelope, puts it back, fumbles, takes out a small bunch of keys, raises it to his eyes. Remember, he's short-sighted. Chooses a key, gets up, moves to front of table, so his back is to the audience now. He stoops, unlocks the first drawer, peers into it, feels about inside of it, takes out a reel of tape, peers at it and puts it back, locks the drawer, unlocks the second drawer, peers into it, feels about inside it, takes out a large banana, peers at it, locks drawer, puts keys back in pocket. He turns, advances to the edge of the stage, so he's facing the audience, right? He halts, he strokes the banana, peels it, drops the skin at his feet, puts the end of the banana in his mouth, remains motionless for a moment, staring vacuously before him. So like a monkey with a banana in his mouth, staring at the audience. Finally, he bites off the end of it, turns aside and begins pacing stage back and forth in front of the stage, eating the banana. Of course, we know what will happen whenever you throw it, but any of us who watch cartoons, whenever you throw a banana peel on the floor, someone's going to slip on it. He slips on it, tosses the banana peel off into the audience, right? So all of this joking is well and good enough, but there is something here that's beyond the joke, and Beckett never explains it exactly. But he does mention, or I do mention his constipation, and Beckett does too, although he doesn't gesture to it exactly. On an earlier tape, Krapps is listening to his earlier self saying, I've just eaten 3 bananas, despite my troubled bowel situation. So bananas, if you didn't know, are constipating. So the joke is, of course, Krapps can't crap. Krapps can't be himself. He can't, but he also can't go to the bathroom, right? So he is named the very thing that he can't do. So there's a joke here, but it's a kind of devastating joke on he cannot be who he is. He cannot live up to even his name, and he keeps forgetting the very thing. He has some love for bananas, just like a monkey. He's just sort of this strange kind of person, but he doesn't even understand that he shouldn't be eating so many. And he's now 70 years old. He's known about this since he was a young man, and he continues to do it. Also, those of you who know, you get severe bowel problems when you're in advanced stages of alcoholism, which arguably Krapps could be, because whenever he goes to have a drink, he goes outside the light into the darkness to drink, pops a cork, drinks, comes back inside and feels better. So I think it's like he does not know, he cannot remember that he shouldn't drink. He cannot remember that he shouldn't eat bananas. He cannot remember this stuff. He conveniently forgets it. It is unconscious to him. And then an earlier tape will remind him, right? Okay, so what I'd like to do is kind of skip over a lot of the funny business and get to the tapes themselves and what I think they represent. But do I have any questions? Do people have any questions at this point before I begin, or comments? All right, we're rushing towards the end of the semester. I think this may be a sign of that, the sign of kind of fatigue, or maybe it's just all very clear. So I'm not going to pause the way that it's called for in the script, but I'm going to read Krapps' part. Obviously, there's only one person. Actually, that's not true. There are 2 characters. There is Krapps and there is whichever tape is playing. So I think we have to think about this not as a single, I never thought about it like this quite before. It's not really a single person play. It's a play that has one human, one actor and one machine. And they are each characters in their own, excuse me, right. Even though what the machine plays is Krapps' own earlier self speaking, is the voice of an earlier self. All right. So it becomes clear to us that he does this on his birthday. He doesn't record himself and listen to himself every day of the week, I believe, only on his birthday. And on his birthday, so he listens to previous moments of his birthday. He celebrates his birthday alone. He goes to the wine house. He has some drinks. He doesn't talk to anybody. He writes down notes of what he wants to say on his recording about how the year went. And then he goes back and he records that. And when he goes back, he also listens to specific years. And it seems as though he chooses the years at random, but I want to say they're not random at all. And he listens to them and he remembers. Then the rest of the year, he forgets. So he's like a man without an active memory. It's like Alzheimer's, but where it's on a tape, or some form of dementia, but it's on a tape that he listens to. And it's quite clear that he does remember. He just doesn't want to remember. That's why he continues to go back to the same tapes year after year, okay? So here it is. He's got a ledger, which tells him what's on each tape. If you don't know what a ledger is a big bound book where you write figures, like if you're keeping, in the old days before you had Excel sheets, it's where you would write down, how much money the business made or how much household income you're spending. You have a big ledger, okay? So he opens his ledger and he's looking to find the tape that he wants by the year number and when he did it, okay? So he bends over the ledger, he turns the pages, finds the entry he wants. Box three, I can't quite do it, he rolls his R's. Box 3, spool 5. He raises his head and stares front with relish. Spool, spool. Happy smile, pause. He bends over table, starts peering and poking at the boxes. Box 3, 3, 4, 2, with mild surprise. 9, good God, 7, the little rascal. He holds up the box and peers at it. Box 3. He lays it on the table, opens and peers at the spool inside. Spool. He peers at the ledger. 5, 5, 5. The little scoundrel. He takes out a spool and peers at it. Spool 5. He lays it on the table, closes box 3, puts it back with the others, takes up the spool. Box 3, 3, spool 5. He bends over the machine, looks up with relish. Spool, happy smile. He bends, he loads the spool on the machine and rubs his hand. He peers at the ledger, reads entry at the foot of the page. Mother at rest at last. Black ball. He raises his head, stares blankly at front, puzzled. Black ball? He peers again at the ledger and reads, the dark nurse. He raises his head, broods, peers again at ledger, reads, slight improvement in bowel condition. Memorable what? Equinox, memorable equinox. He raises his head, stares blankly front, puzzled. Memorable equinox? All right. And then finally, farewell to, turns the page, love. So this opening makes it seem as though this is just a year at random. But I want to sort of argue this is not a year at random. In fact, he listens to this tape several times during the play. It really is the main thing he's interested in. It is the year his mother dies. the last year that he was in a relationship with anyone. And it is what he calls farewell to love. So this is the year when he's 39 or 40, I'm not sure. And he decides, I'm done with love, right? So here is the tape. And now remember, he's sitting there listening, and as the thing tells you, he's got a listening position. So he puts his sort of hand like this or like this, and he listens, turns his ear towards the machine. He even, there's certain points where he sort of caresses the machine, okay? And then in a strong voice, this is an earlier voice, like it's the same hymn, but not as craggy, you know, an earlier version of his voice. He says, 39 today, sound as a, and then what happens is at this point, as he gets comfortable, he knocks some boxes off the table. He gets really mad and he throws all the boxes off the table. And then he turns around and rewinds it, starts over again. 39 today, sound as a bell apart from my own weakness. And intellectually, I have every reason to begin to suspect at the crest of the wave or thereabouts. Celebrated the awful occasion as in recent years, quietly at the wine house, not a soul. Sat before the fire with closed eyes, separating the grains from the husk, the grain from the husks, jotted down a few notes on the back of an envelope. Good to be back here in my den, in my old rags. Have just eaten, I regret to say, 3 bananas and only with difficulty refrained from a 4th. Fatal things for a man in my condition. Cut them out. A new light above my table is a great improvement. With all this darkness around me, I feel less alone. In a way, I love to get up and move about in it, and then back here to me, Krapp. The grain. Now, I wonder, what do I mean by that? I mean, I suppose those things worth having when all the dust has settled, when all my dust has settled. I close my eyes and imagine them. Extraordinary silence this evening. And then he goes on to talk about Bianca, his last love affair. And he says a bunch of crap about his writing, right? I think Krapp is a scholar of some sort who probably writes journal articles. Maybe he's a professor, I don't know, but it's really not pretty because he really doesn't care that much about it. But he thinks about himself being at the top of his intellectual game, being able to write these great things, all of this. And Krapp knows exactly what he wants to hear. He goes back after listening to his early self for a while. He goes back and drinks a little bit, and then he comes back, he switches it back on, he fast forwards it, he winds it back a little bit, and he hears of his mother's death, which is event number 1 in this important year of 39. So here is the part at the bottom of page 4 or page 59, depending on which way you want to think about it. He says that he's sitting on a bench outside the hospital room where his mother is. I sat on a bench by the weir where I could see her window. There I sat in the biting wind, wishing she were gone. Hardly a soul, just a few regulars, nursemaids, infants, old men, dogs. I got to know them quite well. Oh, by appearance, of course, I mean. One dark young beauty I recollect particularly, all white and starch, incomparable bosom, with a big black hooded perambulator, most funereal thing. A perambulator is a carriage, a baby carriage. When I looked at her direction, she had her eyes on me, And yet when I was bold enough to speak to her, not having been introduced, she threatened to call a policeman, as if I had designs on her virtue. Ha ha ha. The face she had, the eyes like chrysolite. Ah, well, I was there when Krapps switches it off and he thinks about it. He's remembering, okay? So he can remember when he hears the tape, and he can allow himself to go back into memory and remember that day, remember the large, the nurse with the large bosom and the large eyes, and he can recall it. Ah, well, I was there when the blind went down, one of those dirty brown roller affairs, throwing a ball for a little while to a little white dog, as chance would have it. I happened to look up, and there it was, all over and done with at last. I sat for a few moments with the ball in my hand and the dog yelping and pawing at me. Moments, her moments, my moments, the dog's moments. In the end, I held it out to him, and he took it in his mouth, gently, gently. A small, old, black, hard, solid rubber ball. I shall feel it in my hand until my dying day. I might have kept it, but I gave it to the dog. So basically, I think this is clear, but just let me just sort of be a little more clear about it. He's here throwing a ball to a dog. There's a little doggy. Can't draw him very well, especially with this stupid drawing thing, but anyway, little doggy. Oops. And he says as he throws this ball to the dog that he'll never forget the feeling of the ball in his hand. Meanwhile, up here in the window is his mother dying in her hospital room. And when they pull the blinds down, that means she's died. So he sits here throwing this ball, holding it in his hand, and his mother has died. Now, there's a lot wrong with this picture, right? Why isn't he in the room with his mother? Why can't Krapp actually show up for anything in his life? Why does he have no friends? Right? This is all part of Krapp the clown, Krapp the everyman, Krapp the dissociated, tape addicted, avoidant, hyper avoidant person. He cannot be in there. And yet he says he'll remember to his dying day, but he won't remember. And he's attracted, right? Who's he attracted to? The nurse. And who is the nurse? The nurse is the one caring for the infant. Who is he? He's the child or the infant to the mother. What is he attracted to? Her bosom. What are babies all about? Getting fed by the bosom. So the nurse, right, becomes a kind of, the nurse becomes a kind of figure for the mother who ends up dying, right? At exactly the moment he's holding this black ball to this dog. So it becomes this memory of the death of the mother in this 1 year. I think this is very, very important. And the fact that he can't remember the ball, even though he says, I will remember it, feel it in my hand till my dying day, he can't remember it. This is all part of sort of Krapp's pathology, the problem for Krapp. All right. All right. And then he talks about, then he goes, I'm sorry, I'm missing my place. Here he is. So then he talks about spiritually what it is, to be who he is, all this philosophical claptrap. None of it is really interesting to Krapps. He wants to get forward to what he knows is on that tape. He knows it, so he stops and he fast forwards it again. Now, if he didn't really know, and he really was, then he wouldn't be able to fast forward it. So he fast forwards it again, and he comes up to this place where he says, great granite rocks, the foam flying up in front of the lighthouse, and the wind gauge spinning like a propeller. Clear to me at last that the dark I have always struggled. He's like, oh, shoot. Again, he winds it forward. And then he's like, unshadowable association until my dissolution of storm, all this bullshit. Fast forwards it again. Finally, my face in her breasts and my hand on her. And he's like, boom, there it is. That's his last love, right? We lay there without moving, but under us all moved and moved us gently up and down and from side to side. So they're actually laying on a boat. The two of them are laying on a boat. He's on top of her. Past midnight, I never knew such silence. The earth may be inhibited. Here I am. And he switches it off and he rewinds it to hear the whole story of Farewell to Love. And here it is. Upper lake with the punt bathed off the blank, then pushed out from the stream and drifted. She lay stretched out on the floorboards with her hands under her head and her eyes closed. Sun blazing down, bit of breeze, water nice and lively. I noticed a scratch on her thigh and asked her how she came by it. Picking gooseberries, she said. And I said I thought it was hopeless and no good going on. And she agreed without opening her eyes. I asked her to look at me. And after a few moments, she did. But the eyes just slits because of the glare. I bent over her to get them in shadow and they opened. Let me in. We drifted among the flags and stuck. The way they went down, sighing before the stem. I lay across her with my face in her breasts and my hand on her. We lay there without moving. But under us all moved and moved us gently up and down and from side to side. Now, I'm just going to paraphrase sort of, I will leave it up for you to read this. I'm going to paraphrase sort of the rest of the play, which is that he then goes and drinks a bit more, takes out the notes that he had written, that envelope, remember, that he had in his pocket, pulls out that back of that envelope where he had written notes, and he records a new version of his tape. This one is very different. This one is about how he has this prostitute or this woman come in from time to time to service him, how he's miserable. It's just not the same. He's like unhappy, sarcastic, awful. And what he ends up doing is after he does it, and he even sings, remember earlier in the play, he says, do I ever sing? No, but we hear him singing, right? And then he yells, he gets all upset, and he actually then repeats a single phrase from the earlier tape, lie down across her. He winds the tape, wrenches it off, throws it away, puts on spool, whatever it is, tape 3, spool 5, and he listens to it again, right? And it ends with him the earlier voice saying, would I want those, would I want that, those years back, my chance of happiness with Bianca or with this woman? He says, no, I wouldn't. And then the curtain falls, right? So it's a very, very dark ending with the farewell to love. So I want to say a couple things about the farewell to love and the relationship to the mother and the death of the mother. I think the farewell to love is really, he really is not looking to break up with her when he says this, in my opinion, okay? Because what he says is he says to her, it was useless going on, right? And she agreed. Now, maybe you guys are much healthier than me, but a lot of times when people want to be reassured about their relationships, what they do is they go to the other person and they say, I don't know, maybe we shouldn't keep doing this. And what you really want is the other person to say, no, 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 I love you. We have some problems. We'll work it out. But what this woman says is like, okay, okay, I'm out. And then he's stuck. He can't do anything, right? He goes, it's useless going on, and she's like, yeah, you're right. It's like, ugh. So the farewell to love is not like, do you know what I'm talking about? This way in which you sort of like, you really want someone to just reassure you, like, you don't want the person to say, okay, I'm out. That's fine, that makes sense. So the farewell to love, I think, is ambivalent. And it's real, and ambivalent again means something not just that you're unclear of, but that you feel two ways about, like you both want it and you don't want it at the same time, equal. That's what ambivalence means, by the way. It's not the same as feeling nothing. If you feel nothing for somebody, that's not ambivalence. But if you feel like a deep attraction to them and repulsion at the same time, that's ambivalence. So he's ambivalent about this farewell to love. And he's ambivalent. And the other thing about it is it's related in some way to the death of the mother. Right? I think that it's very much related. So let's go back up here for a second and talk about what the tapes represent, okay? So these tapes that are all organized and written down in a ledger basically detail every year of his life that he records on his birthday. But it seems to me that he returns this particular day to hear a particular tape for a particular reason. So what do the tapes represent? Well, okay, they represent what's been repressed to his unconscious, or perhaps what we might call the preconscious, something you can get at if you need to, but you don't like to think about it. They represent another, somebody speaking back to him. He has nobody to interact with. So the tapes are that which he interacts with. They're his memories. They represent the social aspect of his life. He has no social life. And then they also represent something that Christopher Bolas, somebody in the same tradition again, object relations theorist, calls the unthought known. So the basic idea here is that Krapps really knows what's on each of these tapes, but he can't allow himself to think it. We really know very often what it is we should do or should in a situation or how we feel, but we can't let ourselves think it. This is the idea of the unthought known. And literally, you can be unconscious of it, or you might just be avoiding it. It depends. It could be either sort of way. All right. And then there's this issue of the spool. His his infantile love of saying this word spoo, which is the way the actor does it in the thing, it kind of makes his voice like this. It's kind of a cooing sound and a baby sound. And for me, over and over again, Krapps mentions eyes and breasts, right? And I think that then in a certain sense, the death of the mother and farewell to love are all wrapped up in a kind of unsuccessful attempt to free himself from the mother and to become his own person. And the tapes then take the place, right? I don't know if you can, I think I drew this in a previous class, but if you can get a view of what the tapes look like, they look kind of like eyes or like breasts, okay? So they wind around one another like this, two spools on a tape recorder, and they move in this motion, which is both kind of, they actually don't do this motion, but I think this motion is important, the kind of circling back. Instead, they could kind of go like through a head here, and they kind of, the tape goes like this instead of the other way, right, and through the head of the thing. But the basic idea is they could be eyes, they could be breasts. And remember, he's saying, let me in. He noticed his head is on her breasts and his hand is on her, he says. And then he wants to look in her eyes and he's like, let me in. The nurse's eyes were like chrysolite, which is black. The little black ball is like a little part of this whole fixation that he has, that he holds in his hand. All right. So I'm basically suggesting that very late in his career, Beckett writes this play, which is very basically psychoanalytic. I mean, this could be Mrs. Ramsay, right? Mrs. Ramsay with Lily's head on her lap. Do you remember that scene? It's a very, very telling scene. Everybody wants to return to the mother and just be comforted. And in a weird way, that's what Krapps wants, but he can't ask for it. And he ends up saying, in effect, farewell to love. So the change in the modes of production, tape recording, handheld devices like iPhones or smartphones, iPads, these radically change the production and reproduction of everyday life. So what I was arguing for here, that a change in the mode of production corresponds to a change in the relations of production. I think that it's arguable that Samuel Beckett's looking forward or thinking forward to a day when people are going to be playing games with their thumbs on a machine for an entire weekend, going to sleep for 5 hours at a time or whatever, or binge watching television programs all weekend long, right? Carrying your device with you into the bathroom so you don't miss a single episode, so you can watch every single episode. Something that's part of who we are now, but it changes who we are as humans, and it changes our relationship to the human. And for Krapps, it became a pathology that he really can't get over. So just again, to remember, each time that he goes back and listens to an earlier set, and this is what I track out in the we never hear 29, but we do hear 39. And we hear the guy at 39 making fun of the guy at 29. And we hear the guy at 49 making fun of the guy at 39. So he listens to these earlier tapes and he makes fun of his earlier self. But the truth is, behind the remembering and the judging is a deep longing, because back here, he still had a relationship to humans. He still had love. He hadn't said farewell to love yet. The mother hadn't died. They hadn't pulled down the grimy blinds. He hadn't held the ball in his hand. Once he does that, then he is basically closed off and living only in a relationship with this machine, these artificial machines. I mean, maybe Beckett is even like thinking forward to Pornhub, excuse my, mentioning it, but you know what I mean? Like this, like people living in this fake world, or Zoom teaching. I mean, who knows what he's looking forward to, but some kind of like way of not being, the change in the mode of production, changing the culture so drastically that it changes what it is to be human. All right, so are there any questions to this or comments? And I hope I haven't been too bleak in my outlook, but I love this play. And I think it really speaks to a lot of our condition. So questions or ideas or comments? I would look for, it's likely there'll be a question about Krapps' last tape on the final exam, just because it's such an interesting kind of end point for the most part of our look. We've come from one form of longing, a longing for nature, to a longing for relationships. From the Romantic poets to Beckett, that's might be one way we can think about it. If there are no questions, then we'll close early, and I'll wish you guys a happy weekend, and I will see you Tuesday. And on Tuesday, we'll do some poems, but I'll also prep you for everything you need to know about the final. And on the final day, we'll do all the evaluations and any other last minute things we need to do, and some closing thoughts. Okay, so have a nice weekend.